AskReddit. r/AskReddit by Reddify. Serious Redditors who've been 100% certain they're about to die. What was going through your head at that moment? I was 10 minutes into a 3-hour flight and seated in the back row next to the toilet. There was a huge bang. The lights in the cabin flickered and dimmed. The plane wobbled hard in the air. I could smell smoke instantly, and an ear-deafening bad engine sound started up. I looked over at the flight attendant, who was still strapped to the fold-down seat right next to me. She has a look of pure terror on her face. That's when I knew I was going to die. I was profoundly pissed off. I thought, duck, this is how I go now? I thought about all of the crap I made it through in life and really regretted that I wouldn't get to continue that progress. I was mad that I was going to die when traveling for work. I thought about trying to text the people I love, but didn't want to mess with the navigation systems of the plane in case there was some way we could survive. We had lost an engine because we struck a goose. The plane turned around and returned to the airport easily and safely, as we still had 3 or 4 engines. It always cheers me up to know that I will never be flying anywhere where we can't reach an airfield if we lost an engine. Even a twin-engine airline like the 777 can get home from over the North Pole on just the one. You're in a pickle with a total engine failure, but they're so rare they're not worth worrying about as a passenger. Yeah. I was totally okay with the commotion because I knew that airplanes have tons of redundancies built in. It was the look on the flight attendant's face that scared the crap out of me. There was one guy on the plane who knew we hit a bird because, in the surrealness of having the entire cabin express simultaneous concern, he started laughing and waving his elbows in that classic chicken dance arm flap. One look at terrified flight attendant, another at Mr. Cluck Cluck. But the pilot came on after 60 seconds, announced that we hit a goose, that we had 3 engines remaining, that he would have a ton of paperwork to do when we landed, and that we were totally safe, that he fused it real fast. I agree. Total engine failure is not something to worry about. I still fly fairly often. If anything, this experience shows how safe flying really is. Disgustingly, that I didn't care if those around me were killed, just as long as I got out alive. The knowledge of that being my thought process at the time has haunted me my entire life. Edit. After people asking. I was in a national safari park at night in Zimbabwe with some friends on a school trip, aged around 15 over 16. We were told not to walk around at night because of honey badgers and other dangerous animals. But we wanted to go and see the watering hole at night, so decided to ignore that advice. So we start walking towards the watering hole in almost pitch black save a few lamps here and there. Halfway to the watering hole we heard a bush rustle around 5 meters from the path we were walking on, followed by an unmistakable lion's roar. None of us either bother to look and all run madly towards the watering hole where we know there's a fence. I've never run so fast in my life. All I remember is being terrified I'd trip over my flip-flops and wishing that the lion would go for one of the people behind me and not for me. It's that final thought that ducks with me. The next morning we went and saw that 2-3 meters from the path there was a fence that in the darkness we couldn't see. Obviously the lion was directly behind the fence. I think the majority of people feel like this if they are honest with themselves. It is our survival instinct. Unfortunately, I agree. Think of the timeline of you, or I, being born. At some point someone will have lived at the expense of others dying to you being born. I fainted. Flying off the highway after we hit a patch of ice. After we spun a few times and were heading for the edge of the highway, and I knew that we were going off and that I was about to die. Out I went. Rolled a few times and landed in a snowbank. I came to hanging upside down. Banged up a bit but still alive. Much to my surprise. Fainting may have helped you escape more serious injury. Oddly enough. That's right. Because you go limp, your body takes less of a beating than it would if you tensed up. It's why young children tend to bounce. They haven't learned to tense up while falling over. I was about 10 years old and down at the beach with my brothers. The waves coming in were pretty decent. 2 foot at shore. 3 or 4 foot further out. My brothers were good swimmers, so they headed straight out to the back with their surfboards. I was stuck on the 2-footers with a scrappy foam rectangle board. I decided to try a bigger wave and instant regret set in. The board flipped forward, knocking me off, and the water was no longer shallow enough for my feet to touch the bottom. I tried making my way to shore, but the water was pulling me back. Every time I surfaced I was met with a wave to the face and a mouthful of seawater. Every time I went under all I could hear was the peaceful bloop 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 sound you hear when cameras go underwater with microphones. I was in full panic mode and was sure I would drown until I felt something under me pushing me to the surface. I couldn't think and was still in survival mode, clawing upwards to keep my head above water. As this thing under me kept pushing, I realized I was moving closer to the shore, and suddenly the giant waves were now 2-footers again. That's when I planted my feet into the sand and bolted to the shore, crying my eyes out. Turns out the thing under me was my brother's friend who had been at the beach. He told me he was under me trying to put me on his shoulders, and my kicking made it much harder for him. He was only 2 years older than me, but goddamn if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here today probably. Edit. To answer Op's question specifically, it was terrifying. Being underwater felt isolated because you can't hear anything, and once your head goes above you hear the waves crashing, people laughing / playing near you, and I felt alone and scared out of my mind. I may have been crying, screaming, but I don't remember. It was almostly shock that I was dying. May have been a riptide. I got caught in one and sucked out about 50 meters. Same story. Totally would have died if a surfer hadn't happened to be out there, haha. Might have been, yeah. My brothers have been surfing for years now, and some of the stories they tell are insane. One goes like there were 20 odd people out waiting for the sets to come in when, and I quote my bro, the entire horizon started rising. Freak wave came out of nowhere. Everyone out there got hit, and most of them ended up on shore with destroyed boards and some puking up water after being buried under by this gargantuan wave. The next day they were back out there. Surfers are crazy. I'm a ex-worker. Met the wrong kind of client. He ate me and beat the duck out of me while telling me about the different places he was considering dumping my body. I was more resigned than I expected. For one, I just wanted the pain to stop, and I also thought how I'd just be another dead black hooker and no one would notice, and it was as good an end to a hitty life as any. Then he let me go. I'm glad not to have died by someone else's hand. It is terrifying and lonely, and thinking about it makes me want to puke. But it didn't renew my love of life or anything. Sometimes I wish he'd just finish the job and be done with it. I know. I'm very ungrateful. I'm so incredibly sorry that this happened to you. In January of 2015, I got caught on a burning public transit train. The fuse on the track had burnt out, and we were waiting for the train to get power again so we could get moving. Then the whole thing suddenly went up in flames. Everyone was panicking, but I remember sitting there thinking, I guess this is how I go. Totally calm. Absolute peace. It was in that moment that 18-year-old me was 100% okay with dying. Someone managed to pry open an emergency exit, and then the adrenaline kicked in. So I got out without any injuries. But looking back, I'm still a bit shaken by my response to the whole thing. Edit. I just came back from work to see that my inbox has exploded. So I'm going to respond in bulk to comments asking about a few things. 1. A few commenters asked me if this was in DC. Nope. This was in Cleveland, Ohio. And the press never reported what happened as a major headline. I remember going online and thumbing through newspapers only to find absolutely nothing. And there had been people on the phone with a few media outlets in Clare right after emergency services got there. I left as soon as I saw that everyone had gotten out safe and had a very shaken walk home. So to everybody, in January 2015, there was a massive train fire in Cleveland. And nobody knows about it. Some 50 people almost died because of a hitty public transit malfunction. 2. Why was the emergency exit so hard to pry open? The Cleveland RTA trains are notoriously old and badly functioning. The operators probably couldn't tell you the last time there's been a safety check of the vehicles they drive. There was a similar fire in April 2014 that I found while researching train fires in Cleveland after the incident, and almost no Cleveland-based newspapers/media sources reported on it. I found like one local news video / late edit. This may or may not be relevant, but I work in hospice and death is a very regular thing. Whether or not this contributed to me sort of accepting my impending death, or if it was just a traumatic response, is up in the air. Not nearly as bad. But the last time I went snorkeling in the Keys, I thought I was going to die. The water was a bit choppy. So between that and the jellyfish every 10-15 feet, I swam back to the boat after a few minutes in the water. The moment I get back on the boat, I start getting motion sick. No problem. I think I've gotten motion sick plenty of times before. I'm just going to sit here, sip some water, and look off at the horizon and work on not throwing up. This plan is interrupted by a tingly feeling in my hands and feet. Ignoring the sensation at first, it only grows in sensation. After a while, I realize that the tingling is spreading from my hands to my arms, and from my feet to my legs. Hoping to ride it out, and worrying that I may have gotten stung by a jellyfish and I'm having an allergic reaction, I continue to try and endure it. Pretty soon, the tingling gets stronger, and then I notice that I can't feel it anymore in my extremities. I'm hopeful that it means whatever this is will pass, but now extremely worried when I realize the tingling is gone because I can't feel anything in those areas. This is made worse by the fact that the tingling has spread to my torso, spreading from the bottom of my chest upwards. My friends get me some ginger ale to help with the nausea/motion sickness. And at this point I realize that the hand that was holding the cup of water has partially crushed it, and that I cannot get my hand to release the water cup. At this point, the tingling is halfway up my chest, and breathing is starting to feel weird. Justifiably, I'm terrified that if this gets much worse, I'm going to have trouble breathing. And we are stuck on a boat about an hour from shore. Internally, I go from worried to slightly panicked to just resigned acceptance. I start thinking about the people I'd leave behind. Throughout this, I've been sort of letting my friends know that something was weird, but as they got more serious I stopped saying as much. Probably from the fear that saying it will make it more real. However, when they noticed that I wasn't able to open my hands, they went to go find the tour guide. She takes one look and says, "I'm fine. I'm just motion sick and need to throw up, and preventing yourself from throwing up can cause weird symptoms." I had to be helped to the side of the boat, as by this time my legs weren't working well, but I did feel much better. After up-chucking breakfast, I spent the next 2-3 hours of the tour just dry heaving over the side of the boat. Not fun. Still, for a few moments there I seriously thought I was dying, and it was an odd mix of fear and resigned calmness. Really? I get motion sickness pretty easily and have thrown up on planes a few times, and resisted throwing up on planes at least a dozen or more. I've never had this sensation before. Now I'm going to be worried that this will hit me next time. Had a really hitty boyfriend in college start hitting me around the neck and head with a cat scratching post, the kind that's just a pole on a heavy base. I remember hoping that he would at least call the police so that my mom would know what happened to me, and being scared that he would bury somewhere and lie about it so they would never find me. Then I blacked out and woke up in the shower. He tried to convince me that I had slipped and fallen. Please tell me they put that psycho away for attempted murder.